Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1688A, and today's date is October 12th, 2018, and the title of the episode is, This is Why the Fed Will Be Taken Down. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, since Trump has been out there contradicting the Fed, you can see it all over the news, the mainstream media, where now the central banks like the IMF, the Biz, the mainstream media, everyone is taking sides, and this is part of the plan. Now, when this system starts to fall apart and really start to fall apart, where the manipulation is not going to do anything, we're going to notice a lot of different changes happening. I mean, yes, we saw the market come down a little bit. We've seen it pushed up again. But when we see gold start to move up, and we don't see the central bank slamming it down with paper contracts, or they try to slam it down with paper contracts, but they cannot bring down the price and gold keeps moving up, then you know something is up. Yes, gold has moved up a little bit, but once again, if it starts to move up, and the central bank comes in and throws paper contracts at it, and it doesn't go down maybe just a couple of dollars and it continually moves up, you know something is up right there and then. Now, Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, they're out there saying that, yeah, we think gold could climb to over $1,300 per ounce. Now, when we see the central bank lose complete manipulation and the economy completely implodes on itself, you're going to see gold not move up above $1,300, $1,400, $1,500. You're going to see it go to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $7,000. So this is something to watch. And we can see that gold has moved up a little bit. If you notice, when the market comes down, people get nervous and afraid, and they go into assets that they know will protect their wealth. And gold has moved up a little bit. But is this the big one? No, I don't think so as of yet. But you'll notice the changes in gold when the central bank loses all of its power to manipulate that market. And of course, the way they manipulate it is they just continually throw paper gold at the real physical gold market, and they try to bring down the price and control it every single time. Same thing with the cryptocurrency market, where you had Mt. Gox and those individuals that confiscated all those bitcoins. They threw it onto the market. I mean, this was done on purpose. It was all completely set up to bring the Bitcoin market down. And every time they sold all the Bitcoin, you saw Bitcoin move down, down, down. And this was all part of the plan to demonize cryptocurrency. But one thing for sure is that Trump has started the push of the plan to get rid of the central banking system. And here are a couple reasons why we really don't need the Fed, why the Fed should not even exist, and why it hurts the people of not just the United States, but around the world. Now, we like to think that we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people. But the truth is that we have an unelected, unaccountable group of central planners that have more power over our economy than anyone else in our society does. And this is not just the United States. It's also the ECB, the IMF, the Biz, and the rest. They are unelected leaders who are controlling countries, forcing them to write laws like austerity and other type of laws, forcing the governments to do what they want. The Federal Reserve is actually independent of the government. In fact, the Federal Reserve has argued vehemently in federal court that it is not an agency of the federal government and therefore not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The Federal Reserve openly admits that 12 regional Federal Reserve banks are organized much like private corporations. The regional Federal Reserve banks issue shares of stock to the member banks that own them. 100% of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, they are private banks. The U.S. government owns 0 shares. The Federal Reserve is not an agency of the federal government, but has been given power to regulate our banks and financial institutions. This should not be happening. According to Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, The U.S. Congress is the one that is supposed to have the authority to coin money, regulate the value thereof of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So why is the Federal Reserve doing it? If you look at the U.S. dollar, it actually says Federal Reserve note at the top. In the financial word, a note is an instrument of debt. In 1963, John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 11110, which authorized the U.S. Treasury to issue United States notes, which were created by the U.S. government directly and not by the Federal Reserve. He was assassinated shortly after. The Federal Reserve determines what level some of the most important interest rates in our systems are going to be set at. In a free market, the free market would determine those interest rates, not a central bank. Of course, they're determining it because they are pushing their own agenda. The greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history was when there was no central bank. The Federal Reserve was designed to be a perpetual debt machine. The bankers that designed it intended to trap the U.S. government in a perpetual debt spiral from which it could never possibly escape. Since the Federal Reserve was established 100 years ago, the U.S. national debt has gotten more than 5,000 times larger. A permanent federal income tax was established the exact same year that the Federal Reserve was created. This was not a coincidence. In order to pay for all of the government debt that the Federal Reserve would create, a federal income tax was necessary. The whole idea was to transfer wealth from our pockets to the federal government and from the federal government to the bankers. The period prior to 1913, when there was no income tax, was the greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history. From the time the Federal Reserve was created until now, the U.S. dollar has lost 98% of its value. From the time that President Nixon took us off the gold standard until now, the U.S. dollar has lost 83% of its value. During the 100 years before the Federal Reserve was created, the U.S. economy rarely had any problems with inflation. But since the Federal Reserve was established, the U.S. economy has experienced constant and never-ending inflation. In the century before the Federal Reserve was created, the average annual rate of inflation was about 0.5%. In the century since the Federal Reserve was created, the average annual rate of inflation was 3.5%. The Federal Reserve has stripped the middle class of trillions of dollars of wealth through hidden tax of inflation. Since the Federal Reserve was created, there's been 18 distinct recessions or depressions. 1918, 20, 23, 26, 29, 37, 45, 49, 53, 58, 60, 69, 73, 80, 81, 90, 01, 2001, 2008, and the one that is approaching. According to an official government report, the Federal Reserve made $16.1 trillion in secret loans to the big banks during the last financial crisis. Many people say this is a lot more. This is why we need to audit the Fed. We need to understand what they're doing. But of course, they don't want anyone to audit them because it's a secret, because it's a private corporation, and the people don't have the right to know. Well, then this should not be part of the American system. We don't need it then. Most Americans have absolutely no idea where money comes from. And the truth is that the Federal Reserve, it just creates it out of thin air. This is how it's done. When the U.S. government decides that it wants to spend another billion or $1 trillion that it doesn't have, it does not print up $1 billion. It creates and prints up U.S. Treasury bonds and makes them and takes them over to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates $1 billion or $1 trillion or whatever it is out of thin air and says, okay, here's our currency that we just created out of thin air. Give me the Treasury bonds. That's it. So why do we need the Fed to do this? If we can create and print Treasury bonds, even if we do it electronically, why do we need the Federal Reserve to do that? It makes no sense. I mean, the U.S. government, it could actually create money, spend it directly into the economy without the Federal Reserve being involved at all. But if that happened, we wouldn't be $21 trillion in debt And that wouldn't serve the interest of the bankers at all. Now, Congress, they have the power to shut down the Federal Reserve at any time. They can just do it. But right now, most of our politicians fully endorse the current system. They become very, very wealthy off of this system. Why would they want it to go away? So nothing is going to happen until we clean house, until we get rid of all these individuals that understand that the deep state, the central bank, they're all one and the same. And we need these individuals to see what the problem is and to get these people in line to show them and to say, you know something, we really don't need the Federal Reserve. This is why Ron Paul have been pushing the Audit the Fed bill for a very long time. Trump is out there now contradicting the Fed. Basically what's happening is they're pushing the plan forward. This is all part of the same plan. Getting rid of the deep state, getting rid of the central bank, because it's all tied into the same thing. Everyone thinks it's separate. It really isn't. How do you think the deep state was able to fund all their operations? Think about it. If we were on a system that was backed by gold, and we only created the currency for the amount of gold that we had, can the government borrow additional funds? No. Yes, intelligence operators across the seas, they can, create funding through maybe drug deals and things like that. But that wouldn't be enough compared to what they get from the central bank. This is trillions of dollars that are completely missing, that are funneled into certain programs. And if you get rid of the source, just like they got rid of the source of the Islamic State funding, which was the oil convoy, they completely implode on themselves. If you get rid of the central bank, the deep state then implodes on itself. It's all connected. It's all one and the same. And it gets worse and worse as time goes on. I mean, think about it. Leading up to the 60s and the 70s, when Kennedy was trying to create currency outside of the Federal Reserve, the central banks, they don't like that. The deep state, they don't like that. This is not something they wanted. And think about it. They waited from 1913 to 1971 to come off the gold standard. Yes, they were doing other things, getting everything prepared for what they wanted. But you have to remember, they are very patient. And we went through different stages. We had a World War II where all the gold was sent to the U.S. and the Federal Reserve was in control of this gold. Gee, it seems like this was their plan in the first place. And then, of course, what do? You take the hard assets and you create currency, which is absolutely worthless because it's on paper or electronic blips. And this is what the central bankers do. They take their phony paper money and they put countries into debt and they buy up their assets through their other shell corporations, their other investment funds, and things like that. We're in this gigantic scam, and they're scamming the entire world. And it's time to end all this. And this is why we need to end the Fed. And I want to thank Michael Snyder. He put a lot of this together, and he has a lot more points on this, and it was fantastic. So if you want to see this, you can go to End of the American Dream, and you can see the full list is like 101 points where he laid all of this out. And we know that we need to dig down deep, push our politicians in government, not just here in the U.S., but around the world. Start a movement to get rid of the central banking system. There is no need for them whatsoever. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.